Something strange keeps happening in New York. In this year, almost nobody is surprised by it anymore. A 21-year-old from Quezon City has arrived at this year's US Open without needing to survive a single qualifying match. She didn't have to fight her way in through the early rounds like she used to. She simply walked onto the grounds as a direct entrance, projected to be seated inside the world's top 20, a ranking she has never carried into a Grand Slam before. 3 years ago, almost nobody outside the sport knew her name. Now, the question in press rooms, locker rooms, and living rooms across an entire country isn't whether Eala belongs here, it's how far she can go. Is this simply the best season of a gifted young athlete's career? Or is the tennis world watching the opening chapters of something much bigger, a story that is only just beginning to be written? That question has been building for over a year, and to understand why it matters so much this week in New York, you have to rewind. Past the sold-out sessions, past the upsets over Grand Slam champions, back to a little girl on the shell courts of a country club outside Manila, swinging a racket that looked far too big for her. Eala didn't come from a tennis nation. The Philippines has no deep well of professional players to draw from, no long list of major champions to inspire the next generation. What it had was one family that loved the sport quietly, and one child who couldn't stay off the court. Her grandfather, her first coach, guided her for the better part of a decade before anyone outside her family had heard the name Eala. Her mother, once a competitive swimmer, taught her what it meant to keep going when a match or a season refused to cooperate. Then, in 2018, a 12-year-old Eala won one of the most prestigious junior tournaments on the planet, the Les Petites As in France, a title that in the past has foreshadowed future Grand Slam champions. Suddenly, the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain came calling with a scholarship offer. Her family made a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. They uprooted themselves and relocated to Spain so a 13-year-old could chase a dream with no guarantee of paying off. Her brother tagged along on those early family practice sessions too, chasing the same ball around the same courts long before either of them had any reason to think it would lead anywhere. There were junior Grand Slam trophies along the way, doubles titles at the Australian Open and the French Open, and then, in 2022, the singles crown at the US Open Juniors, making her the first Filipino ever to become a junior Grand Slam singles champion. She balanced a rigorous academic program with brutal training blocks, graduating from the academy in 2023 in a ceremony where Rafael Nadal himself handed her the diploma. But here's the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. Being a great junior means almost nothing on tour. Eala turned pro in 2020, and for years she did the unglamorous work that never makes it into a documentary, grinding through low-level ITF events most casual fans have never heard of, chasing ranking points one at a time, absorbing losses that would have broken a less stubborn competitor. By the start of 2025, 5 years into her professional career, she was ranked outside the world's top 130. Respectable, unremarkable, the kind of ranking that gets a player a wild card into a big tournament and not much else. That wild card changed everything. In March 2025, Eala arrived at the Miami Open, a WTA 1000 event, one tier below the Grand Slams, as an unseeded outsider ranked around 140th in the world. On paper, this should not have happened. She opened with a gritty win over 2017 French Open champion Jelena Ostapenko. Then she dismantled reigning Australian Open champion Madison Keys in straight sets. 2 major champions gone, and Eala hadn't dropped a set. Then came the quarterfinal. World number 2, 5-time Grand Slam champion Iga Swiatek. Watching from her box that day was Tony Nadal, the coach and uncle who had helped build his nephew Rafael Nadal into one of the greatest players the sport has ever seen. A teenager who had never beaten a top 10 player did it on the biggest stage she'd ever played,
breaking Swiatek's serve 8 times and closing out the match 6-2, 7-5. "Beating Iga is unreal," she told reporters afterward. "I'm just trying to soak it in." Rafael Nadal posted his own congratulations online, saying he was extremely proud of her and urging the country to keep dreaming. Eala's run ended in the semifinal against Jessica Pegula, 1 win short of a final nobody would have predicted 2 weeks earlier. It stung, but the important part had already happened. She became the first Filipina to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal and the first to crack the WTA's top 100, not because of one lucky bracket, but because something in her game had clicked into place. Here's the part that made it repeatable and not just a fluke. Eala has never had the biggest serve or the heaviest forehand on tour. When a WTA interviewer later asked how she prepares to face players who simply hit harder than she does, she didn't talk about power at all. She pointed instead to her footwork, her return depth, and her ability to solve a problem mid-match rather than overpower it. It's a quieter kind of weapon. But against Ostapenko, Keys, and Swiatek, it had just taken down 3 Grand Slam champions in a row. That was only the beginning. 2 months later, she reached her first tour-level final at Eastbourne, falling to Maya Joint. She picked up her maiden professional title soon after at a smaller event in Guadalajara. In that August, at the US Open, she became the first Filipina to win a Grand Slam main draw match, advancing to the second round in the same city where she now returns as a seeded contender. She closed 2025 with a career-high ranking of WTA number 50, a number that 12 months ago would have sounded like fantasy. But a great season can still be an isolated one, and that doubt followed her into 2026. The year didn't start the way anyone scripted. In Melbourne at the Australian Open, hundreds of Filipino fans packed the outer courts to watch her main draw debut, chanting so loudly that umpires repeatedly asked for quiet. Eala raced through the first set 6-0. Then Allison Parks, the lower-ranked American across the net, steadied herself and stole the match in 3 sets. Eala left the court escorted by security through a crowd that adored her and still couldn't will her to a win. "It's a process to take it all in," she admitted afterward. Days later, she flew home to headline the inaugural Philippine Women's Open in Manila, greeted at the airport by strangers applauding a face they'd only ever seen on a screen. On paper, that was a disappointing start to a season. It didn't feel that way long.
She ground out results across the Middle East, a quarterfinal in Abu Dhabi, a run through Dubai that included a win over top 10 player Jasmine Paolini. By mid-March, she'd cracked the top 30 for the first time, a new career high of world number 29. Not every surface cooperated. On clay at the French Open, she fell in the first round 2 years running, a reminder that this rise was never a straight line, and that the same game built on movement and return depth still had holes to answer for. Then came the grass, and with it, the moment that changed how the sport talked about her. At Wimbledon in July, Eala won her first 2 matches cleanly. In the third round, on center court, she found herself across the net from the tournament's defending champion, Iga Swiatek again. This time, there was no element of surprise. Swiatek knew exactly what she was walking into. It didn't matter. Eala won a brutal opening set tiebreak and closed out the match 6-2 in the second, beating the same 5-time major champion for a second time on a second surface more than a year apart. She broke down in tears in her on-court interview, barely able to finish her sentences. "I think I kept cool when I needed to control my emotions," she said once she'd gathered herself. She became the first Filipino in the Open era to reach the second week of Wimbledon, surpassing a mark set by Philippine tennis legends more than 70 years earlier, back in the sport's amateur age. Jasmine Paolini ended the run in a tense 3-set fourth-round battle. Eala left center court to a standing ovation, pausing to press her hands into the shape of a heart for the crowd before she walked off. But the message had already landed. Alex Eala was no longer a surprise contender. She was simply a contender. So the question kept returning, louder each time. Was Miami a miracle, or was it a preview? Washington gave the clearest answer yet.
At the Mubadala DC Open in August, Eala tore through one of the toughest fields of her career, wins over Zheng Qinwen, Leylah Fernandez, Elina Svitolina, and Naomi Osaka. 4 different styles, 4 different puzzles solved in a row. Waiting in the final was Jessica Pegula, the same player who had ended her Miami dreams 16 months earlier. Eala dropped the first set 6-4. Then something shifted. She swept the final 2 sets 6-4, 6-0, 12 games to 4, closing out the match with her old conqueror now on the losing side of the scoreline. It was her first WTA Tour singles title, and it lifted her into the world's top 20 for the first time in her life, the highest ranking any Filipino has ever held on the WTA Tour. 16 months earlier, Pegula had been the player who ended her fairy tale in Miami before it could become anything more. Now she was the proof that the fairy tale had turned into a career. She wasn't chasing moments anymore, she was starting to create them on demand. But something else had been building alongside the rankings, something that had nothing to do with a scoreboard. The following week in Toronto, Eala beat Alicia Parks, the very player who denied her in Melbourne back in January, and her night sessions sold out, an occurrence organizers admitted they had never seen this early in a WTA 1000 draw. Filipino flags filled the stands, signs reading Alamania were waved back and forth. Her coach, Joan Bosch, later admitted just how strange it had become to manage, saying it's tough to always have the best level chasing crowds like that. Even Jessica Pegula noted that her own podcast had grown thanks to a wave of new listeners who found her only through Eala. This wasn't a fan base following a good season anymore. It was a phenomenon following her from city to city. Months earlier in Auckland and again in Dubai, local Filipino communities had shown up in numbers organizers hadn't planned for, turning routine early round matches into something closer to championship nights. Home is the people and not the place, Eala said of crowds that keep finding her thousands of miles from Quezon City. But a phenomenon this size comes with a cost. The same week the noise peaked in Toronto, Eala lost in the round of 16. In Cincinnati, she fell in 3 tight sets to world number 10, Amanda Anisova. Not disasters, not collapses, just reminders that she is still 21 years old, still carrying a level of expectation that most players her age never have to think about. Because that's the real challenge sitting underneath all of this. It isn't only whoever waits across the net in New York, it's the fact that Eala isn't just playing for a ranking anymore. She's playing as the highest-ranked Filipino in WTA history, the answer to a question her country never used to think to ask. What happens when someone from here actually breaks through and keeps breaking through? And now she's back in the city where, as a teenager, she once lifted a junior trophy nobody expected a Filipina to win. The same city where a year ago she made history with her first Grand Slam main draw victory. This time, there's no wild card, no underdog script, no low seeding to hide behind. She arrives ranked inside the top 20, a direct entrant for the first time in her career, with a mixed doubles debut alongside Felix Auger-Aliassime already on the schedule, and an exhibition against her friend and rising rival Iva Jovic before the tournament even properly begins. The singles draw drops in the coming days. Somewhere inside it is her first opponent. Somewhere beyond that, potentially, are the very players who have already fallen to her: Swiatek, Paulini, Osaka, and Pegula. One thing has become clear watching her these past 18 months. Reaching her best level is no longer the question. She's done that against 5-time major champions on 3 different surfaces, under every kind of pressure imaginable. The real question, the one nobody can answer until the matches are actually played, is whether she can hold that level match after match against tougher and tougher opposition deep into a tournament that shows no mercy for a bad day. So, is this simply the best season of a talented young player's career, or is the tennis world only now starting to understand what it's watching? Not long ago, she was a wild card hoping to survive one match at a time. Now the whole draw has to account for her. Alex Eala isn't trying to prove she belongs on this stage anymore. She's here to find out how much further it goes. This isn't the end of her story. It might be the moment the story truly begins.
If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for more stories like Eala's that you won't want to miss, and let us know in the comments, how far do you think she can go at this US Open?